Yeah, may want to close the door just in case it's that's out there. Well, thank you all for coming. I really do appreciate you stopping by. I've been trying to set up some of these meetings around Austin to really try to meet with voters. We do a lot of forums, we do a lot of meetings with the groups, but I'm really trying to get out and actually talk to neighbors and talk to groups of voters in different parts of the region, especially south, because I live south. I've lived in South Austin now for almost going on 10 years. In a South Austin resident, which is why I'm spending a lot of time talking about single-member districts. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But just for background, for those who don't know me, my name is Dom Chavez. I'm running for Place 5 City Council against the incumbent Bill Spellman. The reason I'm running is a couple of things. One, I believe we have an affordability crisis in Austin. It's largely gone ignored, and it's time for us to start talking about it in a very serious and very straightforward way, be honest about what the challenges are we face in this community related to affordability. Second, I want to talk a lot about making sure that our neighborhoods, our schools, and our places of work remain safe. Okay, Austin's a relatively safe city, but we also have some challenges that we want to make sure we take care of in that regard. And then finally, which is a big passion for me, is I'm talking a lot about education. And why I believe that the City Council ought to take a much more direct leadership role in shaping education policy in Austin and working collaboratively with AISD, Austin Community College, who we're in this building today while they're doing classes, and I'm glad we're able to come here and share one of the spaces they have here, because I want to work with ACC as a City Council member and as a City Council. With our local universities, St. Edward's, UC Austin, and others, and our business community as well as parents, to make sure that we've got an educated, skilled workforce that can support the future of this community. Make sure that it's aligned with the types of jobs that we want to create in this community. And so those are the things that I'm focused on in my campaign. I'm going to talk about each one of those in a little more detail. First and foremost, affordability. There was an article in Time magazine that was recently published, and it was a very interesting. It was a front cover Time magazine article. It offered the first part of the article talked about what we all know, all the top 10 lists that Austin has become part of, all the great things that our economy has done in the last few years, all the new jobs that we've created, the great development that's been occurring downtown. But the second half of the article kind of showed the underbelly of Austin and some of the challenges that are happening. The gentrification of East Austin, the lack of affordable housing that's available to residents in this community, but most importantly, talking about not just is there a house available at a fair price for families to live in, but what's happening to our electric rates, our water rates, our property taxes. And here was a stunning statistic that even I didn't know, even though I've been talking about affordability since I've launched my campaign. One of the things that I did not recognize was our poverty rate in Texas is 18%. The poverty rate in Austin, Texas is 20%. That is stunning. That is stunning. That is not Austin. That does not mesh with our values, the things that we care about in Austin. The fact that our poverty rate in this community is higher than the state average is something that I'm very, very concerned about. But it's not just those in poverty. There's a lot of people in the middle class, in the working families that are having trouble paying their bills. I met a woman from Crestview. She bought her home, and it was an affordable home at the time, 20 or 30 years ago, for $70,000. She's lived in that home, raised a family. She's being so squeezed by property taxes, so squeezed by her water and electric bills, that she actually takes her laundry to the laundromat now because she can't pay the water bill anymore. She doesn't want to leave her house. She wants to live there. She wants to eventually pass that home off to her children. But she's not sure how she's going to continue to make ends meet. And that's in Crestview. And that's hardly a downtrodden neighborhood. You go out east to Latco Valley, and the challenges are even more acute. We literally have pockets of our community that have 20% unemployment, that have poverty rates at 50%. That's not Austin. That's not what we value in this community. And so what I've been talking about during this campaign is that we need to face facts for all the good that's been done with our economy, we have to recognize that there is an affordability crisis. And the bottom line for me is the day that our city, county, and state employees, our public servants like firefighters and police officers, our small businesses, and our working families have to live in communities called Kyle, Buda, Round Rock, Pflugerville, Bastrop, that's the day we've lost Austin. We shouldn't be that kind of community. And so we need to do a lot more to try to address the affordability issue. One thing I think we should look at is a property tax, a homestead exemption for city property tax payers. I know we have one for 65 and older. I know there's a question about will state law allow it. If state law doesn't allow it, let's go change the law of the state. I'll be the first one up there to change it if we need to change it. But that would be one way to help working families relieve pressure on property taxes. The second thing that we can do to help affordability is we've got to control city spending a little better. We have to be more judicious about how we spend money at City Hall. Every check that they write, the homeowners have to cash. It comes out of our pockets, and so we need to be far more judicious on how we're spending those dollars to make sure that our homeowners and our residents are getting the best value for the services that we're providing. And then the third thing is we have to wrap our arms around what's going on at Austin Energy and our water utility company. We have to recognize that the biggest cost driver for families is utility bills, electric and water. When we start raising those, when they start talking about raising your rates by 10, 15, 20%, that has a real impact on family budgets. They make it sound small. They make it sound like it's only $20 or $30 extra a month. But that's one day of daycare. I mean, those are literally the choices that some families are forced to make. And we need to be far more judicious about how we're dealing with our electric rates and our water rates. First and foremost, I think we have to make sure that our utility company is spending the money to provide the services and is much more judicious in terms of whether they're using those dollars to support other city functions that maybe aren't necessary. Because the bottom line is every time that they spend a dollar, that's a dollar that comes out of revenues, and that's a dollar that we probably have to make up in rates. And so that's something we need to be sensitive to. So that's in terms of affordability. In terms of public safety, as a former neighborhood president in far South Austin, public safety is near and dear to our hearts. In my neighborhood, people are concerned about property crime. People are concerned about having home break-ins and those sorts of things. So I want to make sure that we have cost-effective investment in public safety. Now, there was always a concern about is our public safety budget eating too much of the city budget, and I think we ought to be cognizant of that. We ought to recognize that. We ought to find ways to be far more cost-effective in public safety. But I don't believe the answer is cutting back. And in fact, you'll recall there was an article today in the Austin American Statesman talking about crime rates in Austin, and crime rates have declined. We are a relatively safe city. But they also warned that we have drug cartel activity. There was concerns that drug cartels may be infiltrating and recruiting from our middle schools to sell drugs. We ought to be concerned about that. And we ought to find the investment to make sure that we keep our schools and our neighborhoods safe. Because we are, according to the federal government, a major trafficking point for the cartels coming through Mexico and through South America. We have to recognize that and make sure we make the proper investments. Then the third thing that is part of my agenda is education. And I've talked to some of you before, and I always get the comment, I say, I care about education. Say, well, why don't you run for AISD? Why don't you run for Austin Community College Board of Trustees? It's a good point. Why don't I? The reason I don't, and the reason I think City Council ought to focus more on this issue, because education is not just ACC's issue, it's not just AISD's issue, it is a community issue. Education impacts everything we do in the city today, and it's going to impact us very dramatically in the future if we don't get better results, if we don't invest, and if we don't work together to improve outcomes and provide quality education and workforce training to all parts of our community. And so I believe that a perfect model that we should be mimicking is only 70 miles to our south in San Antonio, what Mayor Castro has been doing with the Brain Power initiative, where the mayor and that city council has rallied the community, brought together the school districts, brought together Alamo colleges, brought together UTSA, brought together the business community to say in a very dramatic and bold way, education is going to be the single greatest priority we have for San Antonio for the foreseeable future. Because they recognize that by improving education, improving workforce training, that is going to place San Antonio in a far better position to compete in the global economy. It's going to place San Antonio in a position where they don't necessarily have to rely on tax abatements alone to bring companies, because people will be interested in investing in a community that has workers that support their businesses. And so I believe that's the type of model we ought to follow here. And again, it's not just San Antonio. Louisville, Kentucky has done a very similar plan, when they set a bold goal and said, we want to produce 55,000 post-secondary educated workers in our community by a certain date, with special emphasis on African Americans and Hispanics, because they recognize our demographics have changed, and we have to lift all boats. We have to invest in education of all parts of our community. So I do really believe that the City Council, and I'm not suggesting it's just me, but it ought to be the City Council as a whole, take a far greater leadership role in education. And so I'm going to ask to do that if I'm lucky enough to be elected as City Council member. The final thing that I wanted to talk about is single-member districts. I'm a strong proponent of the 10-1 plan. I'm a strong proponent of the independent commission to help us draw districts for Austin. It is time for this community to reflect the size, diversity, and complexity of issues. I've talked to some of you who've been 30-year residents in South Austin. South Austin looked a whole lot different 30 years ago, didn't it, than it does today. And as I've kind of chided my opponent, Bill Spellman, a few times at some forums, as neighborhood president, if I walked into his office and said, I've got a sidewalk, they're not connecting the sidewalk at Cohaba Lane and Davis Lane, can you help me? He or his staff would probably have to look on a map to figure out what I was talking about. Well, that's fundamentally, once we reach that point, we've got a problem. And so I'm supporting 10-1 because I believe that we'll get better government, we'll get better representation by actually letting every corner of this community have representation at City Hall. So that literally there will be a member that you're more likely to run into the grocery store or the local library or sporting events for kids than what your chances of doing that today if you live in South Austin. Because I will tell you, they don't live in it. It's no fault of their own. They live in their part of town, and I'm happy they live there. But that's not what government was intended to do. We need better representation. So if I'm lucky enough to get on City Council, I'm going to push very hard to make sure that gets on the ballot in November. I'm going to push very hard that they don't dilute it into a hybrid system, which is only designed to game the system to continue to support the type of government we have in place today. And most importantly, if nothing else, I will be the South Austin representative, but I'll also be the Northwest representative and the Southeast and Northeast representative, because I will recognize that the challenges of being a part of the community that's had no representation, I will make sure that I've listened to those voices that have been left out in the cold for too long. But hopefully, come this November, we will change all that with 10-1. And then we'll all be forced to run again. And guess what? You'll probably see me on the next campaign. And I'm happy to do it. I'll be forced to run again for a district. And I'll be happy to do it. Trust me. It'll be the best experience of my life to be able to come to this neighborhood and say, elect me as your neighborhood representative to the City Council. So with that, I will go ahead and open it up to questions. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Since you're a big proponent of the single-member district, I guess it's way too soon, but what scares me about it is that we may all of a sudden end up like the state legislature rezoning, like take my representative away from me because they didn't want me to vote Democratic anymore. Sure. So here's where I think we'll have a way that, here's how I believe it'll be different than what's happened in the Texas legislature. One, we're going to have an independent commission. I will not support any move to single-member districts unless that is coupled with having an independent commission of good citizens who have no connection to any political consultant or any council member or any particular part of town, but they're going to sit down as good citizens of Austin to draw the lines in the fairest, most balanced way possible.
I think by doing that, it's going to make maybe night and day compared to what just happened with the Texas legislature. So that, because, trust me, you don't want me, if I'm elected to city council, drawing my lines. That is fundamentally that doesn't make any sense. So I believe that'll be one way to address that issue. Secondly, one of the criticisms that often comes up is, well, is there a fear of ward politics? You know, we worry about the Chicago model from the 1920s when there's ward politics. I will tell you, we already have ward politics. The problem is there's only one ward. And it's focused in central Austin. That already exists. Second, I will say, I actually like how Travis County Commissioners Court works. They work very collaboratively with each other. If you look at how their bonding process works, when they come up with their bonds when they go to the voters every 3 or 4 years to get bonds to buy open space or make road improvements, there's a collaborative process. I mean, the Precinct 3 commissioner maybe doesn't get everything they wanted in this particular package, but guess what? There's negotiation. Hey, next time there's a bond election, you're going to get those things. I think the same thing will happen. I think we get better products out of our bonding. I think we'll get better products out of policy because there will have to be give and take. Now there doesn't have to be any give and take because we've created a system where literally every city council member that sits on there today has hired the right consultant or group of consultants that have helped them get 50.1% of the 8% of people who turn out to vote. And so why should they care about what happens in South Austin? Now, part of that's our fault because we don't vote. Can't tell you how many people I run into where I talk about the issues I just did and they say, well, I agree with you. Why aren't we doing more? I'm with you. Man, let's go fight. And I said, great. When was the last time you voted city council election? Oh, probably the Carol Strayhorn administration.
I think Southwood did pretty good on the statistics.
Okay, well, good for you. Good for you. But I can't tell you how many people I've run into that, oh, well, I gave up on voting because I live in Southwest or Northwest, and they don't even bother with us. I was down at Circle C the other day and having a meeting just like this, and we ran into people who said, man, this is the first time a council candidate's actually come down here during an election and asked us to come to a meeting. They weren't asking for money. They'll go down there for money. If someone's holding something at their house and they say, pull out your checkbook, council members will show up. But just to come down there like an event like this, hey, I'm going to buy some cheese and want to hear what you have to say, come ask me questions. Said, we can't remember the last time anyone's ever done that. You know why? Because they do the math. The electoral math is Circle C doesn't turn out that much. And these boxes do, so I'm going to focus on those boxes. Well, part of that's Circle C's fault. Part of that's East's fault. Okay? But also, I believe if you go to single-member districts and if you go to a November election for our city council, I guarantee you people are going to be more inclined to vote. They're going to be more inclined to get involved. They're going to feel an actual connection to City Hall. And so many people in this community don't, and that's why they don't vote. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We've got to break that cycle. This May is our opportunity to break that cycle. And I promise you, if I'm on city council, I'm going to make sure that November is going to be the seminal change in our government that's going to make things better. I truly believe that. Other questions?
Yes. How long have you lived in the city, and what have you done before you decided to run for office? What other things?
I've lived in Austin now for about 10, going on 11 years. I've lived in South Austin. Came back from active duty in the military, and I bought my house in South Austin. So probably been in South Austin for about 7 or 8 years in this part of town. In terms of what I've done, I moved to Texas when I was 18. I was one of the first in my family to go to college. And that's why education is so precious to me, because I've seen it. It absolutely, my father didn't have a college education. My mother didn't have a college education. My dad was able to start his own business and became very successful. But he said to his sons, you will get an education. I don't care what it costs me. You are going to go to college. And it changed the trajectory of all our family. My brother's now a school teacher in 5th grade, and now I'm a school teacher. My brother's a nurse. My other brother's in sales. And here I am. I don't know what I'm doing, but I hope it's for the better. So I came to Texas, got my college degree. I enlisted in the United States Army Reserve. I served for 10 years. I was activated twice since 9/11. Once I served overseas in Iraq. I came back In terms of my service to the community, obviously I'm vice president, president of my neighborhood association, Castle Oak Valley. I've also been involved in other community activities. One thing, I was part of a lawsuit that sued the city because the city was giving, and some of you may be familiar with this, we're giving, quite frankly, in violation of state law, we're giving tax abatements to homeowners who were getting historic designations. Now, in and of itself, state law allows for that. In fact, we want to encourage that, particularly for someone who may own a historic home in East Austin that says, I don't have the money to maintain this historic home or to make improvements to restore it. So state law allows, yes, cities can give a tax exemption or a tax abatement to that family or that homeowner so that they can help offset those costs. But what was happening is the city was giving away tax abatements, it seemed like 2 or 3 a month, to many homeowners in West Austin. When you look at the homes and the price of the homes, you said, well, wait a second, you don't have the financial need to maintain this. And this was at a time when our school district was saying, we're having to fire teachers. This was at a time when they were saying, I'm sorry, there's some neighborhood pools we're having to shut down. And by the way, your library just closed 3 days a week because we don't have enough money in our budget. So we sued the city and said, wait a second, you're giving away our tax base, which is having a real impact on how much we can provide services to people. And we actually got them to settle because they were not asking for any sort of proof that homeowners needed the money to make these improvements. So we increased, they promised to increase the amount of scrutiny they would put on homeowners to prove up whether they needed that tax abatement. It also required, and this was the other crazy thing, once you got it, they never took it away. So if I told you I've got a historic home and I need to do $50,000 of work on it to restore it, when you think if I'm going to give you a tax abatement, the rational person would say I'm going to give you $50,000 or as many years as it takes you to restore that $50,000 you spent. Well, that's not how this worked. It was just forever. So you could have spent the $50,000 and you keep getting a tax break. So now they're requiring you to come back and demonstrate that you've made the improvements so that they can reevaluate whether you need to still need tax abatement. So that was one thing that I was involved with because I thought it was fundamentally unfair to homeowners in my neighborhood who haven't paid their taxes. And also in terms of the fact that we were having to cut school teachers, cut ACC's budget, cut our city budget. The other thing that I recently fought against was Proposition 1. And I had a lot of questions about that. This was back in 2010, the transportation bond, the $90 million that was approved, I think, about 58% of the voters. People ask me, taking a lot of heat for that. Why were you against such a wonderful bond? Because it wasn't wonderful. It wasn't wonderful because the process by which we put it together was flawed. And we ended up packaging almost 20% of that total bond package was for the boardwalk on Lady Bird Lake. Now, I had no problem with that boardwalk. I would have brought that, if I were a council member, I would have brought that to the voters to approve. But it should have stood alone. It should have stood alone for a vote, 1. And 2, I would have rather taken that $15, $16, $17 million and actually invested it in neighborhood sidewalks. That would have been my preference. But we didn't get that option. The city bundled it because they did not believe it would have passed muster, it would have cleared the voters had they pulled it out. And that's part of the reform that I want to bring to City Hall. One of the things that I'm going to propose when we do bonding is not that every single sidewalk that we have ought to be its own proposition, but we ought to be far more transparent on how we bundle these things. For example, if there is a single item that exceeds 10% of the total bond package, it ought to stand on its own. We should bundle all our sidewalk package. Say this is for pedestrian improvements. And here's all the sidewalk projects. So when people go to the voter box, they say, okay, $10 million is for all these sidewalk improvements. I'm in favor of that. $20 million is for bicycle improvements. I'm in favor of that. $30 million is for open space. $20 million is for roads. It's very simple. People would, voters are smart enough to make determinations, but when we package things and mix things up, it gets very confusing for voters. So I specifically proposed that proposition because, again, I felt that one project should have stood alone, and I believe that actually that money should have been better spent on improving our neighborhood infrastructure, and we didn't even get that option. So those are just a couple things that I've been actively involved with the city since I've lived in Austin.
When you say we, who are we?
We, in terms of
these two actions that you, that lawsuit and, or you come to approve or?
No, this was, for the lawsuit, I was I don't forget what they call it. I guess there was 3 of us that were named parties to the lawsuit. One was Alfred Stanley, one was myself, and one was Mike Levy. Mike Levy, you may know. Alfred Stanley is a political consultant with the Democratic Party, does a lot of fundraising. And then I joined on there because I represented, I was kind of the neighborhood representative, someone who could say, hey, look, this has a very negative, these types of programs that provide tax breaks to some homeowners are not fair to homeowners like those that I represented in my neighborhood association, which were, working families and families that were on fixed incomes. So that one lawsuit, we had 2 other named plaintiffs, I guess, if you will.
What's your career?
Career? I've worked for the private sector and the public sector. I worked for the private sector. I used to work for an organization called the Real Estate Council of Austin. You may be familiar with them. In the private sector or the public sector, I now work for the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. Worked there for now 5 years. That's where I really got engaged in the education issue. I do external relations and communications for the coordinating board. Now, a lot of people, particularly in the neighborhoods, they say, oh my gosh, this guy used to work for the Real Estate Council. There's a lot of neighborhoods we know what the Real Estate Council is, right? But I will tell you, I'm not the favorite son of the Real Estate Council right now because I have actively called them out on these development deals, these tax abatement programs. I've told them that, in fact, we were at a chamber luncheon a few weeks ago, or a week or so ago, I lost track of time, where I specifically called them out and said, this is community. With these deals, like the one you just did with Apple, you need to recognize that the public is losing confidence in our city council and our business community. We continue to cut these deals. Because as I said, we've got an affordability crisis, and people don't make the connection. They're seeing you give away our tax base to a company that has $100 billion in cash, which is about 30 years of our city's operating budget. 30 years. And here's people struggling to pay their property taxes, their water bill, their electric bill. So I'm clearly not I didn't get a whole lot of support from the business community or the real estate council that I brought out. My campaign is about telling the truth. As painful as it is, it's about telling the truth to people and saying, look, we have challenges and we need to face facts. Some people don't want to hear it. Some people don't want to accept it. But I feel like that's what residents want. They want someone to tell the truth about what we're facing and to provide real solutions and vision on how we're going to fix it. And that's what my campaign has been about.
How involved is Mike Levy? How involved are you, or is Mike Levy involved with your campaign?
Mike Levy, he has told me he supports my campaign. I've known Mike Levy for about 3 years. We've worked on a number of different issues. One was that lawsuit with the against tax abatements. I know Mike Levy can be a lightning rod. Some people like him, some people don't. What I've told people is I'm my own man. Mike Levy, like anyone else, can support my campaign just as Mario or anyone else can. Mike Levy does not influence my thinking on issues. Like I said, every issue on here is near and dear to my heart. These are the issues I care about. Whether Mike Levy agrees with these or not, that's up to him. Just like it's up to any other resident. But, I understand he can be a lightning rod with some people. But my experience with Mike is he cares deeply about this community as well. And he was interested in particularly that tax abatement issue and how we were having to close libraries and we were giving away, basically telling people in moving to our homes you don't have to pay property taxes. And he thought that was wrong. And I happen to agree with him. So did Alfred Stanley. So you had a pretty eclectic group of people saying that was the wrong thing to do, and I'm telling you, there are a lot of residents out there that thought so too. So, Mike is a supporter. He's told me as much, and like any other supporter, I'm happy to have his support. But again, I'm my own man. I'm going to make my own decisions, and these are the issues I care about. And there may be things he agrees with, there may be things he disagrees with. And that's how I'll operate.
I have another question.
Sure. No, keep asking, please.
I do you always vote? Did you vote at every election, or do you just vote in specific elections?
No, I try to vote in as many elections that I can. I think there may have been one election when I was overseas that I missed or two, but I do try to vote, particularly in every city council election. I've tried to stay engaged with it because, again, I've been connected to it. I believe it's very important.
I have a question.
Yes.
When the city budget was passed, I was looking at the notes. Would you be in favor of having a citizen participation threshold? Because what I've noticed was that when basically us, we're supposed to, I wasn't informed about our budget, and yet, basically they used, I think only about 1,000 showed up at the convention center, and 100, viewers online, and yet basically they use that as in favor of, say, cutting the Trail of Lights. If we're going to get the citizens involved, basically we really need to, one, get the word out, and two is actually have a threshold so that way it does represent the city of Austin.
A couple things, yes. I think that's one of the discouraging things that goes on with city governments. I was having a conversation before we started. Unfortunately, and I don't think this is just Austin, but unfortunately I think we spend an inordinate amount of time focused on what happens in Washington, D.C. and the national news and the national elections, when the fact of the matter is decisions that are made at Austin City Hall, at AISD, at ACC, at our local government have a far more direct and real impact on people's lives than those decisions. Unfortunately, sometimes our public doesn't engage. They don't know how. They don't know where. As I was mentioning earlier, I live in a neighborhood of mostly retirees who will not go out after dark. And then we've got these hearings down at City Hall where they'll stack an agenda, especially if it's a controversial item, whether it's the budget or it's electric rates or it's a plastic bag ban. They'll take the most controversial items, then they'll pin them at the very end of the meeting, and then by the time you get to a public hearing, it's midnight. Now, even someone like me who wants to be involved, I've got a job. Okay, I have kids. I can't be doing that. So part of it is I think we can structure those things and provide, bring these things to the community in a way that more people can participate, and not do it in a way that, again, we push public hearings till the middle of the night. The challenge is it's going to be hard. It's hard to drag people. I said we can make all the changes we want to our election system, but it's hard eventually to drag people to City Hall. I mean, people have a responsibility to participate. However, that being said, I think one way that will dramatically change the participation in this community will be single-member districts. Because then it will be far easier for me, if I were your city council member from South Austin, guess what I would do when there's a budget? I'd come here and I would have in the auditorium in this classroom saying, come on out, I want to hear your opinions on the budget. I wouldn't make you go up to City Hall. I would come to you because these are my constituents. And I think that's where we get a far richer participation and conversation on the budget, because folks will be more willing to drive a block or walk a block to come here and have a sandwich and talk to me about what they think about the budget. So I think changing the structure of our government is going to facilitate having more impact on the budget. If we keep things the same, the way they are, my opponent, Bill Stubman, is not. Single-member districts will facilitate that. I will be able to walk into your neighborhood at your neighborhood association meeting and tell you what's happening. Do you want me to cut Trail of Lights, or do you want me to cut something else in Austin Energy's budget? What's your thoughts? Good question, though. Yeah. Other questions? Anything? Laura, do you want to say anything since you're here? Come talk to...
Drop by. I didn't want to interrupt.
Okay. Well, introduce yourself.
I
was
going to ask one question real quickly. So, from what I've gathered, I was able to speak to some individuals here in Austin in the Hispanic community, and I asked them. I said, "What question? If you could give me a question and I could give to Dominic what would it be. He mentioned to me that his daughter the other day told him, and his daughter's in elementary school, and his daughter came running to him saying that there's a lot of drug dealing in elementary school right now, and she's aware of it. And so his question was, if you were to become a council member, what action would you take into finding out if that's true, number one? And number two, what would be your plan of action in taking care of that situation if it was true?
I think, first of all, and I know APD does coordinate quite a bit with the Austin Independent School District Security or Police Force, I guess, or Police Force, technically. But clearly, that is, and the report that was in the paper today makes it even more stark, that is the biggest challenge we have going forward, because unfortunately, these drug pushers, they want, the only way they keep their market going is they get young people hooked on drugs. We know that that's what they target, because it's just like anything else. That's their new customers. So it's disturbing that not only we have them pushing drugs into our schools now, but now we've got literally middle schoolers and younger being asked to push the drugs in their neighborhoods. And so I think part of that has to be, again, I talked about collaborating with schools for education. I think there's got to be far more collaboration and focus and perhaps even a special task force that focuses on this issue to find out what are the best ways to leverage it. I think there's two parts of this. So one is the law enforcement piece, which is let's find people who are recruiting these kids and get them, stop them, arrest them. Let's get the drugs off the street. Let's stop the young people who turn to this type of dealing in drugs. But the other piece is, again, it's education. The other piece of this has got to be, look, we've got to give hope. Because a lot of times you get where you'll see kids who turn to drugs or turn to crime is because they or their families or their older brothers or somebody else has given up hope. They don't think they have an opportunity. They don't think they can go to college. They don't think they can get a good job. They live in poverty. Maybe they lived in 2 or 3 generations of poverty. So it's easy to fall prey to easy money and to escapism. And that's what drugs offer. Easy money, and this will make you feel good. And all the problems that spin off that. So part of that is, again, if we focus on education, we went into these communities and these neighborhoods and said, you have hope. We can give you opportunity. You have an opportunity to get a good job, get a good education. So I think it has to be a comprehensive approach. One is the law enforcement piece, but the other is what I've been talking about as part of my agenda is improving education, particularly in those areas we've got the greatest challenge. Because we have schools in East Austin that only graduate 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10 high school students, and how do we wake up in the morning and look ourselves in the mirror? This is Austin, Texas. How do we do that?
Our whole schools are on the free lunch program because that's the poverty area.
That's right.
I'm for those programs,
Yeah.
100%. But it is sad to think that there are schools that everyone.
That's right, and the evidence is that if you don't, it is self-fulfilling prophecy. It's the same schools year after year after year, and we've got to find a way to break through that. And the only way we do that, I believe, is through a collaborative effort. Again, that's what San Antonio is trying to do. Now, I don't know how successful it will be. I mean, these are tough challenges. I'm not suggesting I've got the panacea or the magic pill, but I'll tell you one thing, I'm not going to ignore it. And we've got too many leaders in this community who have just decided, hear no evil, see no evil, there is no problem. Because, hey, we're on another top 10 list. Look, Forbes just made us the best city in the community in the world. But you look and you peel back the layers and you see there's a lot of challenges we have to address. So part of my campaign is that we've got to deal with these issues. We've got to face facts. Okay. Any other questions? Laura, introduce yourself.
I'll keep it with you. You have to know. Because we're very similar. Yeah. So thank you guys. I'm Laura Pressler, and I'm running for City Council Place 2 against Mike Martinez. And I just want to say Dom is phenomenal. And he is, I completely support you. I'm going to endorse you. So please put me on your website or whatever you want to do. He's amazing. But I want to echo what you're saying. And you know, you kind of step back, you see the results of poor education and kids not having hope and families not having jobs. But there's a lot the city can do about this, and we're not doing it. And, you know, if we had our rec centers where these kids could go, they would stay off the street. To give them something to do. Myself, I came from poverty. I was in a shelter in Houston. I was a battered woman, and my daughter was 2 years old when we went into the shelter, and I stayed there 3 weeks. And what got me out of this cycle of violence and cycle of issues that, you know, of the poverty was education. It's exactly the answer. And I was a single mom in college. I was a single mom in graduate school. I remember one Christmas, all I had was $16 in the bank. That's all I had. And my daughter was 3 years old, and she didn't know we didn't have any money because she was getting presents from family, and she had no clue we were poor. we were dirt poor. We lived in Manteca and Louisiana out here, and it was a duplex. And every day I took her to daycare and went to graduate school at UT. And I'm like, you know, either I got to get a job or I go and spend 40 hours a week in graduate school because I'm smart and I'm industrious. So I decided to go to school instead of work. Okay, and my opponent, I want to tell you, we were in an event in East Austin, neighborhood. I don't know if you were there at the Mexican office. Were you there? And so people asked him, how do we get our people out of poverty? And I said education. Education's the key. And I don't care, maybe you don't go to college, but you do a training program. You educate yourself. You elevate where you are to some other skill set. And he said, and I'll quote, you don't need to go to college. You don't need to be educated. You just need to work hard. And I take exception with that. Because you can work yourself out of poverty, but you can't work yourself from lower class to middle class. You have to have something you offer to the community, something you offer. And I was very saddened by that. It was like, this man is a huge role model to so many, and he's saying don't get an education? I'm sorry, something's wrong with that picture. Something is very wrong. And that just broke my heart when I heard that. I'm like, oh my gosh, you don't want to be saying that. Elevate people. Set high expectations. Maybe we don't get up here, but we come in here, right? That's kind of how it works. But there's so much the city can do. We don't spend our tax dollars in Austin. There's millions that leave our Austin every week on budget items that this council approves. If we invested those dollars here and kept them here, can you imagine the money, the influx that will happen? We don't have to give handouts. We actually invest in our own tax dollars here. And I think Austin Energy, the electric rates and our water rates are outrageous. They don't do what they have to do to kind of cut waste in government. There's a lot of waste in our city government. Does anybody doubt that? Anybody doubt there's waste? We all know it. We all know it. I talked to the Austin Energy CEO, Larry Weiss, and I said, Larry, what are you doing to cut waste in Austin Energy instead of raise these rates? He told me, I don't have the bandwidth to cut waste. I was like, you're joking. I thought he would come back and say, we beat the bushes, we're doing everything we can, we're at the bottom of the barrel, we have to raise rates for our citizens. That's not what he told me. He said he doesn't have the time to go cut costs in Austin Energy. Who is watching the store? Who is setting expectations for these departments, the water department, the electric department, all the other departments, and say, you know what, we need to cut back before we cut our civic services. Something's wrong with that picture. There's no one on that council right now setting those expectations, and Dom and I can do that.
Aren't we supposed to be the boss? I mean, if you look at the flow chart, it has us, the people,
but they're not,
and yet,
yeah.
you know, it's Austin Energy. And I know that when San Antonio was trying to raise rates, you know, the people spoke out. Having lived in Houston, you know, where it's private, basically, you know, we saw what happened when it was decentralized. So that's why I'm in favor of the single-member districts, because there was enough city council members to advocate for their districts. But here, it seems that city council has gone rogue.
Well,
I'll call it what it is. They've gone rogue. I mean,
I think part of it is, and I've been asked this question when we sat with the city employees union. Part of it is we are the boss. I think
we don't have a strong mayor form of government. We have a city manager form of government, and that certainly, we have to abide by that. I mean, that's the way our charter is set up. That being said, we hire and fire the city manager. We hire and fire, I believe, the city attorney and the auditor. I believe those are the positions that we have the ability to hire and fire. So part of it is if the city management is not effective, if the city management is not being responsive, and I hear this all the time when I talk to neighborhood groups, well, we can't get so-and-so to return a phone call, and they're unresponsive. Well, it's one of those things, either fix it, and if you can't fix it, then the city manager, we have the ability to change that, or at least, make some changes. One. Two, in terms of Austin Energy, we functionally, we have to change the way it's a governance issue. As I've said repeatedly, we have a situation where literally the city council hits the gavel and they're the board of directors for Austin Energy. They approve a transfer, then they hit the gavel and say, we've balanced our budget. I don't have a problem with Austin Energy. In fact, I believe Austin Energy ought to be our public utility. I don't want to sell it. Some people say, well, sell it. No, it is ours. I want it to work for us. I want it to be a value added to this community. That being said, we need to have an independent board that can effectively provide oversight of it and can manage it so that it stays fiscally sound, and most importantly, that it provides reliable electric service and it provides rates in a way, a rate structure that is affordable to users. We can't do that when, and I'll be the first one, remember what I said my campaign is about telling the truth and being honest and straightforward. Let me say this very clearly, I've said this to every audience I've been that's asked this question. I have no idea how to run a billion-dollar energy company. None. I have no idea how to do it. Neither does anyone else on that city council currently. Laura may have some experience. I'm not going to speak for her. But what I'm saying is the way we deal with this, just like they do in San Antonio. San Antonio has an independent board over their public utility company, CPS. That independent board is appointed to 6-year terms, so they cannot be influenced by any one council or any single council member. Each of those members represents a geographic area of the service area, northwest, southwest, southeast, etc. And those folks, if you look at their resumes, the last I checked, one of them was a senior executive of AT&T International. One of them was a CFO, a chief financial officer of a local regional credit union. One was a professor of economics at UTSA. They have no political ties. They're not making political decisions over the energy company. They are making decisions that are in the best interest of, does our energy company work? Are our finances secure? And once we've done that, then we say, guess what? We did really well. City of San Antonio, here is your dividend. That's the way we need to operate Austin Energy. I think long-term, that's where we need to go, because we cannot continue to have a city council that uses political influence, because I don't want to be in that position, where I get to use the dividends from the energy company, so I don't have to make tough political decisions about the budget. That's what I think we ultimately need to get away from.
With regard to Austin Energy, they are a $1 billion, and I was the gross margin manager for their networking business, which was a $1 billion business. And there's no secret on how you cut costs in the company. There's no secret. I'll tell you the bottom line how you do it. You get the first level employees at a department and the first level managers, and you get them in a room and you say, what's the waste? What are the wasteful projects? And I'll tell you, that group of employees, they don't have kind of the political correctness. They just want to do what's right. Now, you go up higher, now it gets really, the air gets a lot thinner, and people start, hoarding their projects and, being territorial. But the first level people, all they want to do is do the right thing. That's what you do. It is so simple, and that's what most companies in town do. It's called lean business practices. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that. But it's a process that's gone on for decades in the automobile industry and the semiconductor industry, all across these industries in this town. And we know how to do it. But that's how you get the answer. And you bring those prioritized projects to the council, and you say, okay, what can we take away? And it's easy. It's not hard at all, guys.
Well,
Then getting the council to accept that because of political reasons is another issue.
But you got to ask the questions first. You let the employees tell you.
No, I agree. I mean, I was in quality management and got thrilled with that, but then I didn't see it happen because once you get up to a certain level, the word is, by gum, we're going to do this project, whether it's cost effective or whether it's going to be the best.
You got it. If the people know what's broken, you just have to ask.
And let's speak while we're talking about Austin Energy, because it's related to the rate increase. It's a conversation that we've not talked about yet, and it's coming. Right now, they're talking about the electric rates, and you keep hearing this talk that this is the first time in 17 years we have raised your base electric rate. Technically, they are correct. It is the first time in 17 years they're talking about a base electric rate increase. What they have not told you is the fuel charge, which is a major driver of your electric bill, has gone up repeatedly. What they're not telling you is the fuel charge does not require City Council action for approval. Austin Energy can just raise it, and they have. What they're not telling you is we've had this conversation about going to the green energy, that we're going to increase green energy as part of our portfolio. And let me be clear, I support alternative energy. If anything, I support it probably. It's more near to my part because I spent a year in the Middle East sitting on a bunch of oil. So I understand we need to change our dependence on foreign energy sources. But what we're not talking about is the cost drivers that is going to produce on ratepayers. We have to have an honest conversation about it. One of the things that we have to look at, and I've told my environmental friends, here's the thing, if we pursue this, they've set a date certain by 2020 or 2025, we want to be, this is what we want our mix of energy to be. That's a great goal. That's a great political goal. But is that right in terms of our business model, in terms of keeping rates affordable, keeping our fuel charge reasonable? The challenge is, if we do this wrong, if we pursue this just because we've set a date certain, and we create a financial crisis at the energy company, and or we create tremendous increase in the price of electric bills for citizens, not only will it do long-term damage to our environmental movement here in Austin, but the rest of the country is going to look and see, look how Austin screwed that up. There is something wrong with green energy. They bankrupted their energy company. Everyone's rates went up 55%. That's not going to do us any good. That's why I've been suggesting to people is we need to bring in national experts to help us develop a long-range plan that helps us understand how do we keep long-term financial stability in our energy company? How do we layer on top of that a reasonable, thoughtful, and prudent approach to integrating alternative energies into our portfolio? And on top of that, how do we do both those things in keeping our rates reasonable for the future? Because what I'm afraid of is this conversation about the rate increase is the tip of the iceberg. This fixes the short-term financial crisis that they have created. It does not address the longer-term issues that all those things I just talked about are going to create for us. And that's what I'm worried about in the long run, and we need to have a serious conversation about that.
I have a question. Are we really way out of line as far as our costs? And the reason I say that is before my mother passed away and she lived in Tulsa, I helped manage her bills a lot, so I knew what she was paying. And her bills were so much higher than mine ever was, in electric and water, gas, all of that. And so I got the feeling maybe Austin was a bargain.
It depends on, and this really gets to the way that the information is presented, and it gets presented in ways that's beneficial from a political standpoint, not from what's fair to present to residents. In terms of the rates, if you look at just base rate versus base rate, they will show you a chart that says our base rate is much better than everyone else's base rate. That may be true. When you look at fuel charge, well, we're a little less competitive. And again, when you look at the charges and the expenses that are coming down the road, that's where the long-term concern is, that where we may be competitive now, the obligations that we have made and the commitments we have made for Austin Energy in the future, near future, are going to drive prices much higher than where they are now. I bring the same argument up with the property taxes. Every budget, the City Council puts up a slide. You go back, they're all online. Go back and I challenge you, look at the last 3 or 4 budgets. There's always one slide that shows the City of Austin's property tax rate compared to Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, Arlington. They'll pick 5 or 6 large cities. And Austin's down here in terms of property tax rate. They'll say, see, we've got the lowest property tax rate in Austin. The next slide, what they don't show, do the next slide. appraisals.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Austin's appraisals are up here. Everyone else's is down here. So multiply the appraisal against the tax rate, and that's the actual taxes. They don't show you that chart, one. Two, the other piece they're not showing you is because we've been using Austin Energy to basically balance the budget, a guaranteed 9.1% dividend. Again, remember I said I do not oppose having Austin Energy, but to support our budget. But when you simply say every year, regardless of the financial stability of the energy company, regardless of whether we're keeping rates fair, regardless of whether we're providing energy in an effective way, we're going to take 9.1% of gross profit and put it in the city budget. They artificially, they don't have to make hard budget decisions if you do that. And what was even more disturbing to me, I think it was 2 years ago, when Larry Weiss, I may have the time wrong, when he first got here, one of his first presentations to City Council was, we have a financial crisis at Austin Energy. About 2 weeks after that presentation, guess what they did? They transferred 9.1% of gross profits out of Austin Energy into the city budget. I mean, imagine if you had, my bank account is almost empty and I'm going to go charge up or write a check. That's part of the problem. Is you may be right in that from a technical standpoint, they will show you information in a way that makes you believe that things are much cheaper than they really are. Some of that, I think, is the way they present information. But what I'm not so concerned about where we stand now. I'm concerned about where we're going to be in the next 5 to 10 years given these obligations. Because I think we'll see some of that reversed. We won't be the most affordable, or near the most affordable. We'll be much more expensive.
One thing I want to say with this is, I think there was a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, where you might remember, there was, Austin Energy's broke, right? They have to do this huge rate increase. I think they're losing, they say, $2 million a week. Well, there was a budget item for $500,000 for new furniture for Austin Energy. Excuse me, and the council just consent on putting it on the consent agenda and just approved it. Also, on the 5th floor of Austin Energy, they are converting all their cubes, those of you that work in industry or whatever, cube model, to complete offices with construction on the 5th floor. And the reason was so they could have more security. Okay, I come from the semiconductor industry, which really worries about their IT. they're and we don't have offices and security, we have cubes. And so $500,000 in new furniture, complete construction of the 5th floor. Who is watching the store here? They're spending us blind. And we called more and worse, and this was during the rate increase discussion. The people were there till midnight. I was there till midnight testifying. And all these people were coming in from Austin Energy. You know that they're upgrading the 5th floor and they just got all this new furniture? And we're calling Lauren Morrison to tell her, do you know this is happening? She had no clue. Who's watching the store with this bunch? If they're doing this wrong, what else is going on? Okay, it's mismanagement. Absolute mismanagement. The other thing I want to get to, one more thing that's going to happen in the next couple of years that was an absolute disaster that the City Council did. They approved this $2 billion biomass plan because they have these goals to be renewable, and even the environmentalists in town disagreed with this thing. $2 billion. Billion. And it costs 10 times more than any wind or solar at the same megawatt capacity would have been. And they had this data, but no one asked them the question. Why is this costing 10 times more than if you just did the whole thing in solar, which is expensive anyway? Imagine this, 10 times higher. We're gonna get hammered with this in the next couple of years. We're gonna get killed with it. And there's one way to get out of this contract. And if that biomass plant, what they're doing is burning wood, basically. And they have really strict air quality regulations and laws that are built into the contract. If they don't adhere to these rules, we can get out of that contract. So if I'm on the council, I am going to be up their butts, okay, trying to get us out of this thing because it's a disaster. Right? There is some loopholes in this contract, and we have to hold them accountable and be questioning that, get the data, and say, you know what, we're not part of this. We can get out of the contract. That is.
Do you have a question? First thing, I think you meant cubicle.
What did I say? Cubes. That's what we used to call them, the semiconductor, the cubes. So I'm sorry, the cubicles.
Yeah, 10
yes,
years
you're right.
ago when I first went to my father's workplace, I saw a huge room of cubicles. I was like, oh my God, I know what Dilbert.
It's on Dilbert, it's on Dilbertish, but it's cheaper than building walls
Yeah, it is.
and putting lights and AC units, and, I mean, because you have to do an AC unit for each room, because you don't, people.
And it makes it easier to express the souls of the workforce.
You got it.
Anyway.
Secrecy thing is what, and you have doors, and you've got, I mean, there's all this infrastructure that you don't need if you have a cubicle.
They're sure expensive though, and when you reconfigure, they're not as cheap as they let you think it's gonna be to reconfigure.
Absolutely.
Because
And
I'm
they're
just-
doing it. Who's watching this?
Because I've been among that, and, you know, it was megabucks to reconfigure even the cubes. You know, they sell them as if they're gonna be really cheap maintenance, and easy to reconfigure and all that.
And when you build the walls, then you have to figure for the rewiring,
All of it.
and you have to hire more people to figure out
This is
exactly
the
what
biggest
column.
waste you can imagine, the biggest waste. I mean, if
And the
they're-
time.
And the time. And again, the first level employees are the ones telling us what's going on. They know this is wrong. Okay, that's how it got up to us, it got to Laura Morrison.
Anyway, and I'm actually kind of, it's about, my question is mostly about the arts, and not only the funding of the local theaters in